Hi everyone, welcome to this week's episode of Follow a Researcher. Last week's episode we talked about asking questions, defining problems, and gathering information that I was using to create my study. In this week's episode we'll be talking about what I need to do to ensure that we have a successful investigation. In the last few videos you've heard me talking about what we will be doing instead of just what I will be doing. As you may have experienced in your science classes, science is rarely performed alone. During this field study, I'll be working with a team of undergraduates who have a very diverse background of research interest and experience. This happens a lot in science. Each of these members will help form an interdisciplinary team of scientists. There's absolutely no way I could do this work by myself. There are really three major parts to any successful research investigation: planning, executing, and problem solving. The first step of planning an investigation is remembering our goals. Last summer, we discovered that different subgroups of green crabs have different levels of parasite infection. This may be a signal that the parasite is actually changing the behavior of the green crabs, making them easier for predators to eat. Parasites have developed a lot of different ways to alter the behavior of their hosts. In our case, some examples might be that the parasite could make the crab more likely to go out into the sunlight instead of hiding under a rock. And it might also lower their fight or flight response to make it less likely that they will run away or hide when a predator does show up. If we're normally looking for crabs that are hiding under rocks, we might be finding more crabs that are not infected because the infected crabs might not be where we're looking. This could result in inaccurate calculations or estimates of how many infected crabs there are. We might actually be able to find that the number is higher than we thought if these behavioral effects are present. If we do find that the way we catch crabs does make a difference in our results, it'll be very important for us to communicate those results with other researchers so that it's easier for us to compare our different studies. So let's take a second to remind ourselves of the data that we will be collecting and how those data can be used to further our research goals. Ultimately, we are trying to determine if the spiny-headed worm parasite has an effect on the behavior of the green crabs that it infects. To do this, we're going to gather as many crabs as we can using our three different sampling methods. We're going to take information about the size of the crab, whether it's male or female, what color phase it's in, what location and method we use to catch it, and ultimately if it is infected with the spiny-headed worm. My favorite part of the investigation is actually going out into the field and collecting the crabs. We always enjoy packing up the van with all of our gear and all of our coworkers and heading down to the coast for a fun day at the beach. This is where the adventure begins, the final product of all of the hard work that we put into planning the investigation. Low tide is the best time for us to sample because it's the time that the crabs are most exposed because there's no water for them to be covered by. And that's when it's easiest for us to spot them while we're looking around on the beach. I have to pull up tide charts for the area and I look at what time the low tides are during the day. When we do sampling during the summer, we can start anytime from 5 in the morning all the way until 7 in the evening. Typically our sampling goes about 2 or 3 hours during the summer, but because we are using traps this time, we're going to do a full 4-hour soak, which just means we are going to let the traps sit in the water for 4 hours so the crabs get a full 4-hour chance to smell the bait and come into the trap. When we go out into the field, we have a lot of different equipment that we have to bring. For example, we always grab gloves and lab notebooks so that we can take our notes and our recordings in. We also bring boots, gloves, like work gloves. We bring a cooler and ice packs that we use to keep the crabs cold while we transport them back to campus. You might remember that last summer we used something that I called pry bars to get a better sample. So we bring some of these out into the field. They are pretty heavy and they're cast iron, and we use them to move some of the rocks around so we can get to the crabs. We also will be bringing crab traps this time. These are just traps that I bought on Amazon. You can get them yourself if you would like. They were about $15 or $20 each. But you can see that they're not modified yet. They have pretty big openings, so we're gonna put some netting over this to make sure that the smaller crabs can't escape. But we'll be putting bait right in the middle, and basically these little doors on the end allow the crabs to just walk right in, and then they won't be able to come back out. So those are some of the traps we'll be using. When we are on the beach, we try to be as safe as we can. We do a lot of moving rocks around, large rocks sometimes. We do a lot of walking on top of seaweed, which can be very slippery. So we try to be as careful as we can to make sure that nobody gets hurt. Of course, we're always worried about the crabs as well. We do wear pretty thick work gloves so that the crabs aren't able to pinch us very easily. When we are out sampling, we try to make sure that we have as little of an effect on the environment that we are in as we can, and that helps us to make sure that we are not negatively affecting or hurting the coast that we are trying to protect through our research. As we would with any research project involving the use of live specimens, we try to treat our crabs as ethically and humanely as we possibly can. So, as I mentioned, we have 3 different methods that we're going to be using to collect crabs. The first one is the method that we used last summer that was really successful for us, which was the large metal pry bars that we used to lift rocks and to try to get at some of the larger groups of crabs. The second method that we'll be using is kind of a crab trap method. So we have this metal trap that we will be picking up some bait, and we will put bait inside the trap in these little bags. The third method that we're using is more of a crab fishing method. So we were able to pick up some traps that use the same idea with the bait, but it's attached to a line, kind of like a fishing pole has a line attached to it. And they're little nets that are about this big, and we'll be able to throw them out in the water, keep an eye on them, and when the crab walks onto it to go after the bait, we'll close the net and we'll pull it in. Because we're looking at the effect of that capture method on the results, this data will allow other researchers to make more informed decisions about their experimental design. The last part of planning and carrying out an investigation is being able to problem solve on the fly. So whenever our equipment breaks in the field or we run into other types of issues, it's really important that you are able to think fast and find a solution, because you're not able to just go pick up a new piece of equipment or just change the conditions of the study to make it easier for you to do your research. You just need to find a solution. Probably the most common example of this would be weather. It's really important to keep an eye on the weather in the days leading up to a study, but also on the day of, to try to make sure you know exactly what times it might be raining or what the temperature will look like outside. Weather is sometimes something that is unavoidable, so sometimes we have to change the date that we are going out sampling. But we have had a few times where we just have to kind of suck it up and go out in the rain, and we get really wet and cold and soaked, but in the end we get to come home at the end of the day and it's nice and warm, so it's always a fun experience either way. So it's problems like that you have to try your best to avoid, but also when things do go wrong, just make a quick decision and try to fix it. Here are some questions for you to think about and discuss over the next week. What are your experiences with planning a trip and the items that you would need? What kind of information did you need to know ahead of time in order to know what to pack? Do you have any stories of times where accidents changed your plans? And finally, we talked about the 3 different capture methods that I'm using. Which one do you think is best? Thanks for following. You can catch a new video and join me live on Twitter each week as I answer questions from followers around the country. Gonna need this.